Jesse Woodson James. Jesse Woodson James remains the most heavily romanticized outlaw of the American frontier, a reputation that deeply masks his reality as a violent domestic terrorist. A former Confederate guerrilla who rode with William Quantrill's raiders during the Civil War, James transitioned his wartime brutality into a criminal enterprise that terrorized the Midwest for 16 years. From 1866 until 1882, he and his brother Frank robbed banks, trains, and stagecoaches with ruthless efficiency. Pursued fiercely by the Pinkerton National Detective Agency long before the dawn of modern federal law enforcement, James proved maddeningly elusive. Living under the established alias Thomas Howard, he led a gang that became notorious for spectacular, bloody raids. The peak of their notoriety came with the disastrous 1876 bank robbery in Northfield, Minnesota, which decimated his crew and forced the gang to scatter. Yet the law never managed to catch Jesse James. Instead, his end came via betrayal. On April 3, 1882, in St. Joseph, Missouri, a new gang recruit named Robert Ford shot James in the back of the head as the outlaw stood on a chair dusting a picture frame. Ford claimed the massive bounty on James's head, and in doing so cemented the outlaw's mythic status as a folk hero for generations to come. John Wilkes Booth. What John Wilkes Booth did altered the trajectory of American Reconstruction. A famous stage actor and fervent Confederate sympathizer, Booth struck just 5 days after the Civil War's effective end. On the evening of April 14, 1865, he slipped into the presidential box at Ford's Theater in Washington. Then, he assassinated President Abraham Lincoln with a single shot from a Derringer pistol. He fled into the night, escaping through the back of the theater. While legend long dictated that he broke his leg during a dramatic leap to the stage, modern historical scholarship confirms he strode out the back door unhindered. The fracture actually occurred later that night when his horse rolled on him in the dark Maryland countryside. For 12 desperate days, he navigated swamps and safe houses. He was hunted by a massive military dragnet overseen by the U.S. War Department. On April 26, 1865, the 16th New York Cavalry cornered him in a tobacco barn near Port Royal, Virginia. Refusing to surrender as the barn burned around him, Booth was shot in the neck through the slats by Sergeant Boston Corbett. He died paralyzed on a farmhouse porch hours later. Alphonse Gabriel Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, Scarface, forced the federal government to invent new methods of fighting the underworld. Dominating the Chicago outfit throughout the 1920s, Capone wielded such immense political corruption that he effectively owned the city's police force and its judges. His empire ran on bootlegging, gambling, and violence. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre on February 14, 1929, where 7 rival gang members were lined against a wall and executed, horrified the American public and demanded a federal response. While Hollywood legend credits Eliot Ness and his celebrated Untouchables with Capone's downfall, their brewery raids were largely theatrical. The true architect of his demise was an investigator named Frank J. Wilson, working for the Internal Revenue Service. Wilson painstakingly followed a trail of ledgers, receipts, and financial records to build an airtight tax evasion case. On October 17, 1931, the forensic accountants achieved what bullets and badges never could. Capone was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. He served time at both the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta and the infamous Alcatraz. Ravaged by the late stages of neurosyphilis, he was released early and died a diminished, incoherent figure at his Florida estate on January 25, 1947. John Herbert Dillinger. John Herbert Dillinger inadvertently built the modern FBI during a furious, bloody 14-month spree stretching from mid-1933 to 1934. Dillinger and his gang terrorized the American Midwest. They robbed banks with theatrical precision and outran law enforcement at every turn. His legend reached its peak on March 3, 1934, when he escaped the heavily guarded Crown Point, Indiana jail using a fake gun he had whittled from a wooden washboard and blackened with shoe polish. He bluffed his way past a dozen guards and drove away in the sheriff's own car. By fleeing across state lines in a stolen vehicle, Dillinger handed J. Edgar Hoover's Bureau of Investigation the federal jurisdiction it needed to hunt him. Hoover eagerly co-opted the phrase "Public Enemy Number 1", originally coined for Al Capone, to brand Dillinger and rally the public behind his fledgling agency. The chase ended in violence on July 22, 1934. Betrayed by Anna Kumpanash, a Romanian immigrant who became known as the infamous Woman in Red, Dillinger was ambushed by federal agents outside the Biograph Theater on Lincoln Avenue in Chicago. Reaching for a weapon in a nearby alley, he was shot 3 times and killed instantly. He was 31 years old. James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray plunged a volatile nation into profound grief and widespread civil unrest. He had escaped the Missouri State Penitentiary hidden inside a bread delivery box in April 1967. Then, Ray spent a year traversing North America under multiple aliases. He obtained false identification, moved between cities, and carefully planned his crime. His timeline of infamy reached its tragic ending on April 4, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. Firing a single rifle shot from the bathroom window of a rooming house across the street, Ray assassinated civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as he stood on the second-floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel. The bullet struck King in the jaw and severed his spinal cord. Leaving his weapon behind at the scene, Ray fled the country, triggering a massive international manhunt orchestrated by the FBI, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Scotland Yard. Slipping through Canada and on to Portugal using a forged Canadian passport, his luck ran out 2 months later. On June 8, 1968, a sharp-eyed customs official at London's Heathrow Airport recognized his alias on a passport as Ray attempted to board a flight to Brussels. Extradited to the United States, Ray pleaded guilty to avoid the electric chair. He was sentenced to 99 years and died in prison in 1998. Theodore Robert Bundy. Theodore Robert Bundy shattered the American illusion of the serial killer as a lurking, unkempt monster. He was handsome, articulate, politically connected, studying law, and murdering people. Bundy murdered at least 30 young women across Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Florida between 1974 and 1978. Catching him was not easy. In 1977, he escaped custody in Colorado not once, but twice. His second escape was a feat of grim determination. Starving himself to lose more than 30 pounds, he crawled through a light fixture hole into the ceiling crawlspace of the Garfield County Jail and dropped down into the jailkeeper's apartment. He walked out the front door into a snowstorm and vanished. Making his way south to Tallahassee, Florida, Bundy committed a savage final rampage at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University on January 15, 1978, killing 2 women and brutally attacking 3 others as they slept. A month later, on February 15th, a patrol officer in Pensacola stopped Bundy driving a stolen orange Volkswagen Beetle in the early morning hours. The routine traffic stop ended the nationwide terror. Bundy was tried, convicted, and executed in Florida's electric chair on January 24, 1989. Dan Cooper, D.B. Cooper. He called himself Dan Cooper, but he was universally immortalized by a media miscommunication as D.B. Cooper. It's November 24, 1971. Boarding Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 305 in Portland, Oregon, the suit-clad passenger quietly handed a stewardess a note claiming he carried a bomb in his briefcase. He demanded $200,000 in $20 bills and 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. The FBI complied. After passengers were exchanged for the ransom on the tarmac at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, Cooper ordered the crew back into the sky, charting a course toward Mexico City. He insisted the aircraft fly low and slow with the landing gear deployed. Somewhere over the dark, unforgiving wilderness of southwestern Washington, Cooper lowered the aft stairs of the Boeing 727 and stepped into the freezing November night. He dropped into a rainstorm at 10,000 feet wearing loafers and a business suit. Though an 8-year-old boy unearthed $5,800 of the decaying ransom money along the banks of the Columbia River in 1980, Cooper himself simply vanished. The FBI pursued the ghost for 45 years before officially suspending the active investigation in 2016. His identity remains unknown. Theodore John Kaczynski. Operating from the deepest shadows of the American wilderness, Theodore John Kaczynski triggered one of the most exhaustive and expensive manhunts in the nation's history. Designated the Unabomber by the FBI task force formed in 1979 to track him, Kaczynski waged a solitary 17-year campaign of domestic terrorism against what he saw as the dehumanizing march of industrial technology. Living in a primitive 10 by 12-foot cabin in rural Montana, devoid of electricity or running water, the former Berkeley mathematics professor meticulously constructed and mailed increasingly sophisticated package bombs. Over nearly 2 decades, he killed 3 people and injured 23 others. His targets ranged from university professors to airline executives. The FBI grew so desperate, they offered an unprecedented $1 million reward for information leading to his capture. The pivotal moment arrived in 1995 when Kaczynski blackmailed the Washington Post and the New York Times into publishing his 35,000-word anti-technology manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future. This arrogance proved fatal to his freedom. His brother, David Kaczynski, recognized the distinctive phrasing and ideological patterns in the document and contacted the authorities. On April 3, 1996, federal agents descended on the remote Montana cabin. Kaczynski was captured alive. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and remained in federal prison until his death on June 10, 2023. James Joseph Bulger, Jr. James Joseph Bulger, Jr., known to the underworld as Whitey, achieved the unthinkable. He corrupted the very federal agency tasked with bringing him to justice. As the ruthless boss of Boston's Winter Hill Gang through the 1970s and 1980s, Bulger was wanted for 19 counts of murder, racketeering, and extortion. Yet his true infamy lay in his secret arrangement as an FBI informant. Manipulating his corrupt handler, Special Agent John Connolly, Bulger systematically eliminated his Italian mafia rivals while his own criminal empire operated with virtual federal impunity. When Connolly tipped him off to a looming federal indictment in late 1994, Bulger vanished. For 16 years, the aging gangster was a fixture on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, his case a source of deep institutional embarrassment for the Bureau. The manhunt finally concluded on June 22, 2011, in a quiet apartment complex in Santa Monica, California. There, the 81-year-old mobster had been living peacefully under the alias Charles Gasco, alongside his longtime girlfriend, Catherine Gregg. Captured and returned to Boston, Bulger was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. His own life ended with brutal finality in October 2018, when he was beaten to death by fellow inmates within hours of arriving at a West Virginia federal penitentiary. Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Loera. Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Loera, globally feared as El Chapo, built a narcotics empire that tested the absolute limits of international law enforcement. Pursued relentlessly by the DEA, U.S. Marshals, and the Mexican military from the late 1980s onward, Guzman's legend was forged through his brazen escapes from custody. Following his first capture, the official narrative long claimed he escaped the Puente Grande federal prison in 2001 by hiding in a laundry cart. However, modern investigations suggest this was a convenient myth fabricated to conceal rampant institutional corruption. Guzman likely walked out the front door wearing a police uniform, enabled by heavily bribed guards and complicit administrators. After his recapture in February 2014, he escaped again in July 2015 by dropping through a hole cut into his cell shower floor and riding a customized motorcycle mounted on rails through a mile-long ventilated, illuminated tunnel. The relentless pursuit finally culminated on January 8, 2016, following a lethal firefight with Mexican Marines in the coastal city of Los Mochis, Sinaloa. Guzman was found hiding in a storm drain. Extradited to the United States in January 2017, the cartel kingpin was convicted in a Brooklyn federal court and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He now resides in permanent isolation within the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado. Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden stands as the most consequential fugitive in modern history. He was the target of a multi-decade pursuit involving the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the military's elite Joint Special Operations Command. First indicted by the United States in 1998 for orchestrating the devastating bombings of American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, his dark legacy was permanently seared into history on September 11, 2001. Masterminding the hijacking of 4 commercial airliners, bin Laden orchestrated coordinated strikes on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon that killed nearly 3,000 people in a single morning. This singular event dragged the United States into 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, and although through a massive lie, Iraq, and entirely reshaped the global geopolitical landscape, escaping a massive American bombing campaign at the Tora Bora cave complex in eastern Afghanistan in December 2001. Bin Laden disappeared into the border regions and vanished for nearly a decade. The most extensive, expensive, and technologically advanced manhunt in human history ground on through 10 long years of intelligence work. It finally ended in the early hours of May 2, 2011. U.S. Navy SEALs from DevGru, executing Operation Neptune Spear, breached his fortified compound in the Pakistani garrison city of Abbottabad. Bin Laden was shot and killed on the 3rd floor. His body was buried at sea within 24 hours, closing the chapter on the most wanted man the world has ever known.